So I recently reread the entirety of Frank Miller's Dark Knight saga in order of where they place in the larger timeline. It was very interesting. It stood out to me how well these books weave together despite sometimes contradicting minor instances and all essentially taking place in different time periods, but there's a charm to that. They're comics full of character. For this Frank Miller summer, I've decided to put together one of my classic reading orders for the Dark Knight saga. I'll be excluding Holy Terror and Batman vs. Wolverine for obvious reasons, and I'll only talk about the confirmed works in this series. I think reading these in direct order did reveal a lot about these series I never noticed before, which we'll get into. Now, normally, my personal viewing / reading order opinions are in release order. For example, the Breaking Bad saga, I think the best way to experience that is in release order. All of Breaking Bad, the first 4 seasons of Better Call Saul, El Camino, and then the rest of Better Call Saul. I think that's the best way to watch it. But I did gain a lot from doing these in order. This won't be a proper analysis, but more of a sharing of notes of sort. I'll give you a simple reading order along with things I've noticed through this journey. If you follow my Twitter, you may have heard some of these points before, but this is a YouTube video, so let's stop wasting time. At the beginning, I'd recommend starting with Batman Year One, the classic. What has now become the definitive Batman origin, but you could start with the first 2 issues of Superman Year One. They go through the first 19 years of Superman's life before the story of Batman Year One even starts. He even becomes Superman presumably years before Batman debuts. There are references to Superman and Batman Year One, particularly the vague allusions to a Man of Steel Metropolis. It's unclear how much time passes in the 3rd volume of Superman Year One, but he does go to college in between first showing himself as Superman and then adventuring in Metropolis. Either way, you gotta start with these 2. It shows both these heroes at their youngest, their purest, and most unjaded. First 2 issues of Superman Year One, Batman Year One, then the last issue of Superman Year One. Then the next in the overall timeline is Batman / Spawn. This is supposedly canon to the Dark Knight saga. It's my least favorite comic of the whole timeline, despite my soft spot for Spawn, but according to Frank Miller, this is part of the saga. The main thing about this book that stands out in the overall saga is the transition from the not insane and menacing Batman from Year One and the Batman that would appear in All-Star Batman and Robin. Crazy Batman. Speaking of All-Star Batman and Robin, that's next. I don't think it's as bad as people say. It is unfortunately unfinished, but you get a pretty enjoyable 10 issues. This takes place roughly a couple years after Superman Year One, and Batman has descended into being a violent maniac who needs Robin to set him in the right direction. Jim Gordon now has Barbara Gordon, but I assume in the Dark Knight universe it's the same reason as the post-crisis DCU, that she is Jim's orphaned niece that he adopts. Something that hadn't occurred to me until this read-through was Sarah Essen. I never read the issue 10 of All-Star before this read-through. The only way I experienced it was through the collected version my library had that only had the first 9. Well, at the end of the issue 10, we see Jim's wife get in a car crash, and he calls Sarah Essen, mirroring a scene in Year One. I had heard the analysis for a while that Sarah, of course, represents Gordon's loyalty to being a cop, and he overcomes that, and that the choice for her to come back into Batman comics in the main DC continuity was sort of a betrayal of that arc. But I never realized, this is maybe I'm dumb, but I never realized in my years of reading and rereading both Year One and The Dark Knight Returns, until finally reading this 10th issue, that Jim is married to Sarah in The Dark Knight Returns. So it's baked into Year One from inception that Jim never gets over his marriage issues. He was always going to end up with Sarah. And this is the kind of stuff I like finding coming through and reading books like these in order. There is a connective tissue through these books. They kind of function as a quilt of different pieces that form like this big epic of varying qualities. But this quilt is unfortunately missing 2 inches because Jim Lee got busy. I like that Plastic Man is a founding member of the Justice League because of, other than his role in DK2, he was one of the earliest created superheroes now owned by DC Comics. First appearing in 1941 with Wonder Woman appearing that same year. It's a very nice detail. As for the book itself, it's unfortunately unfinished. Jim Lee was never able to complete it, so we have a not really a cliffhanger, but a nebulous ending. Now, the next piece in the reading order is The Last Crusade. Now, many have theorized what happens in between All-Star and Last Crusade. We know that Dick Grayson was fired and a proper Justice League was formed. Superman fought Brainiac, and at some point Superman cut Green Arrow's arm off, either after this or before this. Now, the most common interpretation is that either basically the entire Silver Age happened, or Batman 66 happened and or both. A very common interpretation is that the Dark Knight Batman is Adam West's Batman. I like this one simply because it's fun. It's fun nerd crap. Now, The Last Crusade features the death of Jason Todd and is a greater prologue for The Dark Knight Returns. We see society turn on Batman very moralistically. A lot of the themes from All-Star are continued here, except Bruce is now notably sane. He's back to being Batman from year one, as if having Robin has corrected him back to his sanity. Except as we see, Jason Todd's Robin has taken those same traits of violence and sadism Bruce had after year one. Given what we know about Dick Grayson in DK2, we can assume that this cycle of the Robins taking his insanity is just what keeps happening. Bruce is fixed, but he transmits these flaws onto his Robin. I don't have much to say about it other than JR's art is fantastic. It's kind of Frank Miller's answer to both Death of the Family and The Killing Joke. Everything else from here on is pretty straightforward. The Dark Knight Returns is the next one. What can I say about it? It's a comic about the battle between nature, order, and chaos. It feels like every comic book that was written before this was leading up to it. If you had to pick the great American graphic novel, it would be Batman The Dark Knight Returns. If you don't like it, simply try again. This is followed up by the significantly less like sequel, but almost as good sequel, The Dark Knight Strikes Again. I've gone from thinking The Dark Knight Strikes Again was the worst comic I ever read as a kid, to a terrible but interesting comic, to actually this might be pretty cool, to accepting it as a bold, absurdist masterpiece that it is. I've already defended this book in my top 10 Batman comics from last Frank Miller summer, but I love this book. It's so vibrant, exciting, at times ugly, at times beautiful. A lot of the post 9/11 DK work exists to set this up. If anything, Master Race kind of undermines this book a bit. Reading all these in order, this does feel like a great grand finale, but we had 2 more books after this. We now have DK Master Race. No, it's not called Master Race because Frank Miller's a Nazi. It's a reference to the EC comic that inspired a lot of his work, and to compare Iran to the Nazis. This one was co-written by Brian Azzarello. The two would later collaborate on The Last Crusade, which I previously mentioned. Previously, Miller had drawn a very striking page in 100 Bullets, so they had a connection. Miller was allegedly suffering pretty bad from his alcoholism and couldn't draw the entire book and couldn't write the entire book. He does draw some in these interludes where he collaborates with JR and Klaus Johnson. The Adam interlude is notable because it's drawn with the same style and line work quality of his old Daredevil comics. You can kind of make an argument if you wanted to that Frank can actually draw like he used to, but he really wants to just draw these ugly, insane visuals, which I'm down for. Yeah, it's weird reading this now after the Trump-Iran war, since the Candor cult seems to not just be based on random Muslim extremists, but specifically the Islamic Revolution of Iran. Not the first time Batman has battled Iran. Anyway, DK3 is very enjoyable. It feels a bit unnecessary, sort of an apologetic piece for DK2, and it indulges a bit too much in fan service for The Dark Knight Returns. It is a fun blockbuster comic, almost non-stop action and fun moments. It's more comparable to like a Bayformers movie than any of Miller's masterpieces, but I do love Bayformers, of course, so I can indulge in this. It has a lot of good moments with the Atom, and Green Lantern's arc is probably the thing I most appreciated now reading through all these. I still know how I feel about Batman being de-aged in the Lazarus Pit. Like, I get it, I get the symbolism, but it feels a bit like a cop-out. I do like the ending more now that I've read Superman Year One, and it exists. It adds a good loop around for Frank Miller's version of Clark. He was able to experience the joys of humanity and ascended into something more, and now he's teaching his daughter and son the joys of humanity, bringing them more grounded. It's cute. It's a good ending. It feels like a quality ending to this saga, but Frank Miller is one of those great artists like Cormac McCarthy who will work till the day he dies. So there's bound to be more after this. There was the previously mentioned Superman Year One, and the same year DK Golden Child. Oh, and also the 3-page story Batman vs. Wolverine, but that's just like a gag story for the Batman Daredevil crossover issue. I don't know when else I'd talk about Golden Child. I like it. Batman's not actually in the Golden Child child, surprisingly. The book originated as a way for Miller and Raphael Grandpa to work together. It's very reactionary to both Trump and Occupy Wall Street, which isn't the first time Batman has been involved with both. It's a fun adventure. I really like Miller's take on Darkseid in this. It feels like you're reading a random issue in the middle of a larger comic series. I should mention that for Walt Simonson's really damn good Orion run, Miller drew a backup story about the birth of Orion called Nativity in Orion issue 3. It could honestly fit right into this universe. Grandpa's art is fantastic. His design for Batwoman is great. I'd love to see more of Carrie Kelly Batwoman. Actually, on the topic of seeing the unified elements of this series, you kind of see glimpses of All-Star Psycho Batman in her, which is interesting, you know, kind of a continuation of the cycle I was talking about. Grandpa went on to write and draw the currently unfinished Gargoyle of Gotham. It's not as good as this. Actually, I found it pretty lame and uninteresting, but the art's pretty good. Joker's resurrected in this, and it's never fucking explained. Frank Miller specifically did not want an explanation for Joker's return. Grandpa inadvertently hints to why he's back by saying he made it look like he had plastic surgery from being burned. My only assumption is that Darkseid brought him back, but who cares? Actually, there was also going to be a cutaway to the Justice League fighting the New Gods, but it got cut out. But on its own, it's a pretty enjoyable comic book, and I've read it a couple times, and each time I like it even more. Now, that's the full series. Unlike my previous reading order videos, there aren't 1,000 different books, so I can actually rank them, and you can actually get through these pretty quickly. I read through all of these in a week, so it's not that hard to go through. At the bottom, and number 10 is Batman Spawn. I don't get much out of this. Then 9 is Batman versus Wolverine. 8, despite my defenses, is All-Star Batman and Robin. 7 is Golden Child. 6 is Master Race. 5 is The Last Crusade. I like that more than Master Race. I think I've read it more times. How about that? Number 4 is Superman Year 1, followed by Batman Year 1. Number 2 is Dark Knight Strikes Again, which may upset some people, but I love that book unapologetically. And obviously number 1 is The Dark Knight Returns. I'm not that much of a contrarian. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You really think I would put Master Race above The Dark Knight Returns? Think I'd really do that? No, it's the best one. It's the best fucking DC book that Frank Miller's written. Anyway, I'm always bad at ending these videos, but I want to leave it off with this message that you, yes you, should read through these yourselves and make an opinion. You now have a reading order. In my opinion, Miller's Dark Knight Saga is pretty dope. It's pretty good. You're going to be reading a lot of masterpieces in here. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to go reread Superman Year 1 again.
So, there you have it. That was totally awesome. I'm Ben Stein, and until next time, as Darnell told Charlie, keep walking like you're in dreamland.